Well, we're back to where we've been for the past 5 years, status quo. There had been questions, actually, even if he had won. There were questions about would we see him, and if so, how soon, actually walk outside that Ecuadorian embassy. It was far from a foregone conclusion that a successful verdict today would have resulted in him stepping outside that embassy into freedom, so to speak. Why? Let's remember, one of the original motivators, obviously, he was facing 2 allegations in Sweden, and as we just heard from Benedict, though that investigation has been dropped. One was for a rape charge, one was for a molestation charge. But even regardless of that, even though Sweden had dropped that, there's still a lot of speculation because we don't really know, because it's the subject of a potential grand jury investigation in the United States, which is very secretive by nature. Will the U.S. pursue an indictment and possible extradition request on charges against Assange, which have nothing to do with the Swedish sexual charges cases, but rather the very original charges against WikiLeaks that came about in 2010, almost 2 years before he entered that Ecuadorian embassy. And those charges related to WikiLeaks at the time publishing secret material pertaining to the military activity of U.S. Military personnel in both Iraq and Afghanistan. That is what raised the hackles of the U.S. intelligence and defense establishment at the time, led to a very fierce, not just whispering campaign, but very loud and vocal campaign against Julian Assange in many quarters of Washington, prominent among them at the time under the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton, the then Secretary of State, in favor of having him indicted. So his concern being if they had lifted that arrest warrant, if he were, in theory, able to step outside that embassy, could he still not somehow still be captured and extradited to the United States and still have to somehow — that has been his real concern all along. Not so much the Swedish investigation and the prosecutors there, but that once he was in Sweden, potentially, the Swedes would then extradite him to the U.S., where he really could face potentially, and this is obviously potentially, a life in prison if he were to go through a trial for things espionage, conspiracy, and theft. Very high treasonous charges from a U.S. standpoint. So that was his biggest concern. So nothing was actually it's not as if he had won today, we would have seen him jumping out, skipping off the steps of the Ecuadorian embassy and whistling freedom. We don't know that.
We'll have to see what he says if he makes a statement then from the balcony there. Tell us what he's been up to over the last 5 years at Ecuador's embassy.
Oh, we've been saying this. He's hardly been invisible. It's been a long-running reality show with Julian Assange. He's first of all been very prominent, in the media circles, especially Russian media. He had a show with the Russia Today, RT, state-run network. He's been very prominent across the Sputnik online Russian news agency. He played WikiLeaks played quite a prominent role in the U.S. election campaign, and a lot of his critics would say a prominent role in perhaps helping Donald Trump get elected, in the sense that it was very much behind that now notorious, well, depending on where you stand, or not notorious, email dump, the dump of emails, thousands of emails from the Democratic National Committee email private server, just on the eve, just as the Democratic National Convention was starting. A lot of people feel that those emails could have swayed the campaign. A lot of people feel that Assange was at least implicitly, if not openly, colluding with the Trump campaign. Donald Trump Jr. reaching out, suggesting collaboration with him as well. He's also been other causes, very prominent causes since then. He's been very much on the side of the Brexiteers, prominent pro-Brexiter, received Nigel Farage, the former Brexit leader, a prominent Donald Trump ally at the time, received him at the Ecuadorian embassy last year. So these are all questions here. And he's been also in favor of Catalan secession. He has been very, very frequently quoted in the Russian English language media especially. And he's been perhaps one of, according to some recent independent research, and the Sydney Morning Herald published an article about this, he's believed to be the most quoted English language voice on Twitter, which is not to be neglected. What do you think of, you have Donald Trump out there tweeting quite a bit. You'd imagine he's quoted a lot. But apparently Julian Assange beats even Donald Trump when it comes to English language quotes and frequency of them on that social media. So he's been active. He has not been invisible. He has not been out of sight, even if he has been behind, through his own choice, behind those closed walls in his self-enforced seclusion inside the Ecuadorian embassy.